Thank you for joining another edition of Bumps and Thumps, the talk of wrestling. I'm Brian Ferguson. My guest today is no stranger to the squared circle. He is most remembered for his signature move, the Russian Sickle, and his feuds with Magnum T.A, the Four Horsemen, and the Road Warriors. His many accomplishments include winning the NWA U.S. title, NWA World Six-Man Tag Team titles, NWA World Tag Team titles, and the NWA World Television Championship. He was also awarded the Frank Gotch Award in 2006 and was inducted in the NWA Hall of Fame in 2008. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome the Russian Nightmare, Nikita Koloff. Nikita, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be on Bumps and Thumps.
Brian Shatoitar. It's great to be with you. I love the name, Bumps and Thumps. I took a few of those, a few bumps, and I had a few thumps on my noggin back in the day as well. Thanks for having me on with you.
Thank you for joining us, sir. I really appreciate it, and it's such an honor. When I asked you, and you responded so quickly and said yes, of course, I was just, I just went back to when I was a kid watching you on TV and your feuds with Ric Flair, Magnum T.A, and the accent that you had. And I listened the other day when you were talking to a woman on your show, on your podcast, Man Up, about a woman that drove a few hours to see you to get your autograph, and she really thought you were Russian. She was speaking to you in Russian, and you told her that I'm not really Russian, and she left. She was so furious.
Yeah, she got mad. She went from a glow to a scowl in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
And that was just a few years ago. I like to think, with the internet, people now know I don't know that I have a Russian red cell in my body, but that's who I personified and that's who I portray. So I took it as a compliment that all these years she still thinks or up to that point, she still thought I was. But and so many amazing stories, and we'll get into all that and whatever you'd like to chat about tonight. So
sure. Well, thank you again. I'd like to get into you growing up. You're actually from Minnesota. If we could talk a little bit about how you grew up in Minnesota, your life as a child, and your schooling, we can get into that a little bit. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to share that. And, some do, some don't know that part of the story. And I like to tell people this, we'll give bits and pieces of the story tonight and the time we have together. And, if people want to learn more about that, there's different ways they can do that. And if we have time, time at the end of the show, we'll be sure to share some of that, information, whether it's websites or, books I've written and all that. But kind of the Reader's Digest version of that is, that's right. So Minneapolis, Minnesota, not Moscow, where I hail from. And so it's not good English tutoring. It's just the fact that I didn't grow up in Russia. And so Minneapolis, really what I affectionately call some very humble beginnings in what I affectionately call the projects or the ghettos of Minneapolis back in those days, just right outside the Minneapolis skyline. And the official name, I think, was Minneapolis Housing Authority. That sounds pretty official, doesn't it?
But it does.
So those were the humble beginnings until the fifth grade. I was the youngest of four. My mom, raised four of us basically on her own. My dad left when I was 3 years old. He didn't provide any real financial support or moral support, if you will. Only have recollection of, I don't know that I could count on one hand the number of times I remember being with him until my college days, which I'll share that in a moment. So in fifth grade, my mom was able to move us out of the projects out to a suburb of Minneapolis called Robbinsdale.
Yeah.
Robbinsdale, Minnesota. And where I would spend my teenage years in there and junior high and high school. And then I would eventually graduate high school and went not too far from home, just next door to Golden Valley, Minnesota, where I attended a junior college. And it was actually a Bible college, Brian, but I tell people I didn't go to learn about Jesus. I went over there because I knew 4 out of the 5 coaches, and they were the #1 junior college team in the nation.
Oh, wow.
Little Bible college with about 500 students, and they were the #1 JUCO team in the country.
Wow.
So that's the main reason I went, and because I knew some of the coaches. In fact, the defensive coordinator was my very first male mentor, Bill Burke.
Okay.
Met him in 7th grade. He was my very first football coach.
Wow.
And under his wing and began to, he kind of knew the story. He knew I didn't have a dad and really embraced me and took care of me in those early days. And so grateful that Bill did that. And so he was a big reason why I went to Golden Valley. Graduated with an Associate of Arts degree from there. There's more to that story, but they'll need to buy the book. Or
there you go. We'll talk
story.
about that.
That's right. And then from there, transferred to Moorhead State University in northern Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually 2 Moorheads. There's one in Kentucky, and there's one in Minnesota. And I transferred up there and was pursuing my college career up there, scouted by the NFL my senior year. Had a couple major setbacks on the football field and injury-wise, but I like to say it didn't hold me back. I used that as motivation it set me up for a comeback, and was able to overcome those major injuries and graduated from Moorhead with a Bachelor of Science in Physical Education.
Wow.
With minor in health and coaching. And so that's kind of the skinny on my early beginnings and my education.
Well, that's great. I grew up, I'll just real quick. I grew up in Wisconsin. I'm from Rice Lake, Wisconsin, up by Chippewa Falls, Eau Claire, that area.
Yep.
So I'm familiar with the areas you're talking about.
Yeah, you're a Midwesterner as well. And
not now. I'm in Kansas City, but my
okay.
parents are still there. But so that
because that went actually a little more backstory. Speaking of that, then I actually went to in high school. I went to River Falls College, University of Wisconsin River Falls, for a summer camp, and for the football fan out there, there were 2 twin brothers that kicked in the NFL, Matt Barr and Chris Barr. Back in the I think one kicked for the Bengals. I forget who the other kicked for. Anyway, they used to do kicking camps. So in high school, I was a punter. I was a kicker. Oh, wow. I played defensive end. I played tight end. I did it all.
Yeah.
And in fact, my sophomore year, I was the main kicker for our varsity club. And I went to their camp in River Falls.
Wow.
And so I got a little Wisconsin history in me as well.
That's great. That's a good story. See, that's interesting. You're starting in wrestling. I did some little research. It kind of just seems like you fell into it. I mean, you got contacted, but there's a lot of guys from Minnesota, Minneapolis, Robbinsdale area in your group that were just outstanding people and were trained by Eddie Sharkey. And what was that experience like for you?
So interesting. So here's an interesting little detail about that. Because there were, for those of your listeners that maybe don't know, there were actually, I'll say this, there were 7 of us that came out of Robbinsdale right around the same period of time. Mm-hmm. 9 of us total that came out of Robbinsdale. Now I'm gonna go back a bit in history, back to the 1950s.
Okay.
And the man who eventually owned the AWA, wrestling out of Minneapolis, Vern Gagne. Yeah. And being from Wisconsin, you probably familiar with wrestling. And the man who made Milwaukee famous, the Krusher, right?
Yes, sir.
But Vern was a graduate of Robbinsdale back in the 50s. Mm-hmm. And someone that people may not know this little bit of the story, an announcer, a very famous announcer for AWA, for WWF, even for WCW. Any want to take a stab at who that famous announcer would be? And your first two guesses don't count.
I was going to say Mean Gene.
You got it, bro. You got it.
Yeah.
Mean Gene Okerlund was a graduate of Robbinsdale as well. And then along came myself, Krusher Kruchev, a.k.a. Demolition, and many other characters.
Yeah.
Tom Zink, the Z-Man, Nord the Barbarian, Nord the Berserker, Brady Boone. He wrestles under another name as well. Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig, Ravishing Rick Rude. There was a bunch of us, right? And I guess it was in the water. I don't know. Up there. It was in the water tower in Robbinsdale.
I think so.
But so a little known, well, what seems to me a misconstrued fact is a good many of those guys did in fact go to Eddie Sharkey's camp, who you referred to.
Yeah.
Animal and Hawk. I think Wayne Bloom and Mike Enos. I mean, there were a number of guys. I you probably know better than me who all went, but I'll tell you who did not go to Eddie Sharkey's camp, and that was Nikita Koloff.
Really? Okay.
For whatever reason, I don't know why that information's out there. I don't know if someone interviewed Eddie and he took credit for me. I don't know, or people just assume because I come out of Robbinsdale or I come out of Minneapolis that he trained me. But the interesting part of my story, Brian, is when the day I walked into Jim Crockett's office in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the phone call I had with him several months prior to walking into his office to make sure he knew I had no amateur wrestling background, none, zero. And I had zero professional training. I had never even been in a ring.
Wow.
The day I walked into his office. So the fascinating, I think part of the story is I show up with him knowing that. He literally puts me, he introduces me to Ivan Koloff, Don Kernodle, the world tag team champions, says, your new partner, Nikita Koloff's born in the hallways of Charlotte in 1984. They literally put me on interviews for hours and then says, be in Raleigh, North Carolina tomorrow night, Dorton Arena, you're going to wrestle on television. So not only had I never been in a wrestling ring, I'd never been on television prior to that.
Wow.
There you go.
That is amazing. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. When I first started seeing you on TV on TBS, I mean, you looked like a natural. I mean, you had the look, you had the abilities, you had the accent. I mean, you had me fooled, and you had a lot of people fooled.
Well, and I, again, I take that as a compliment, and in many ways, I will say this: I feel very fortunate that that I had the ability to be able to pull it off, right? Or I mean, if I hadn't had the ability, it wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have pulled it.
Yeah.
Which Ivan was very complimentary in many ways. And gets much of the credit, along with Don Kernodle, to what you just said, that my ability to pull it off. Now, Ivan said many, many times, you didn't pay your dues in a wrestling ring or in a small territories or anything like that. But you obviously paid your dues in the gym. And, with my athletic ability, one little side I didn't tell you that people might find interesting is graduating from Moorhead my senior year. I was actually an academic All-American up there. So
wow.
I never Russian team, but I did make the All-American team, right?
That's good to know.
That's good. Little side note there.
There you go.
But Ivan and Don, to their credit, so I was thrown into the fire, right? As you're hearing, like literally thrown into the fire, into the mix that first night. And then for the next 2-3 months, we would get to towns 2 or 3 hours early, and they would, your bumps and thumps. They would bump and thump all over the ring for me for a couple of hours. I'd have a very, very short match.
Yeah.
They world tag match. Ivan would sit in my corner, I would sit in their corner, and on the way home, we would talk about the old school psychology of wrestling, why they did what they did in their matches.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So it was trial by fire. And fortunately for me, you might say I was a good student and adapted rather quickly. And, to your comment.
I was going to say, I mean, for learning on the road like that, you would have to have, one, the athletic ability, and two, the mind to be able to absorb that and do it so quickly and be able to perform like that, because it takes sometimes a person 2 or 3 years, even after wrestling camps, to get to even be in a show and look like you know what you're doing. And so that's a tribute to you. I mean, that's very interesting. I never knew that. So that's great to know.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And again, and I want to overemphasize to your listeners, I was very fortunate. I worked in, some of your old school listeners may recognize some of these names. So, I didn't have most nights I had a squash match, right? I mean, it was a minute long. It was 2 minutes. It was not long. It would be against sometimes two guys. I'd have a handicap match where I'd sickle one, sickle the other, pin them both, in about 60 seconds. So Crockett was determined to build me like this monster Russian machine that was unbeatable. And, which it was part of the lead up to eventually the match against Flair at the Great American Bash, only 13 months into the business. But some of the guys I was fortunate in those first 13 months to work with, Rock and Roll Express, Robert and Ricky, right? Ricky and Robert, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Dory Funk Jr., Legend to the Mid-Atlantic, Johnny Weaver, Rufus R. Freight Train Jones, Blackjack Mulligan. They put me in the ring with, some of the legendary guys who I feel very fortunate in that they all put me over. They, 1, 2, 3, right in the middle of the ring, most of the time. Yeah. Twilight of their career, but saw, I guess, an up and coming rising star and were willing to, I broke out of Johnny Weaver's famous sleeper hold, some big deal, Dory Funk Jr.
That is amazing. I can't believe that you were only in the business a year and you were at the Great American Bash. I mean, that's just amazing, because it takes, like I said, guys, 10 years.
Years sometimes, years and years.
Yeah. So that just tells me your work ethic too, that you really wanted it. And boy, I know a lot of us out here appreciated it. I know.
Well, and I do. I appreciate that, Brian. And to that note, when I broke in, I let Ivan and Don know from day one, that for me it was, I didn't grow up dreaming of being a wrestler. So a door, as you meant, a door of opportunity opened up. Yes, I got a phone call, but a door of opportunity opened up, and I thought, okay, if I'm like anything I've ever done, and we can talk about all this certainly, and I'm sure we will. But like anything I've ever done, well, let me give you one quick backstory on Darso, who was Krusher Kruchev, right?
Yeah.
He's in Louisiana, kind of doing a similar thing as Kernodle in the Mid-Atlantic. He's a turncoat, Russian sympathizer with Nikolai Volkov, okay? Down in the Mid-South. When we brought him into the Mid-Atlantic to be our third partner, and I went to high school with Barry, right? So we played football together. Yeah. And he told me this story. He goes, we were hearing rumors down in the Mid-South that Crockett brought in this shoot Russian couldn't speak any English, but he was a shooter. And he goes, and then I find out down the road it's you. And I'm like, man, I should have known it was you, dude, because he knew my work ethic from football in high school. Yeah. Brian, my mindset is you play like you practice.
Yep.
So my teammates hated me in high school. They're like, dude, it's practice, lighten up. And I'm like, you play like you practice, so I'm a wild guy. So I broke into wrestling I put my mindset to it. I treated it like a business, which is part of the reason I think I had, the success and that I had in my career.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. So travel experiences, is there any one time when you were traveling with wrestlers, maybe Ivan and Don, you talked about a little bit about that, but is there anything in particular that really sticks out in your memory that you learned something or became aware of something that you can remember?
Well, and again, I guess in the early days, of course, like I mentioned, learning and I emphasize old school psychology of wrestling.
Yeah.
An art. There was a real, for your list, there was a real art to the business back then.
Mm-hmm.
That's not there now, and I'm not meaning in any derogatory way.
Yeah.
It's been removed. That part of the business has been removed from the talent,
mm-hmm.
And put into the hands of others. Okay, but thinking back, I mean, I had a lot of. There were memorable trips. I mean, a lot of times it was Ivan, Don, and I. Normally, early on, it was Ivan, Krusher, and I, and then eventually I see the light and I become, a fan favorite, good guy, and then Dusty and I, the Tower of Power, too sweet to be sour, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah, everybody loves to imitate Dusty, right?
Oh yeah, they do.
My super power, if you hold on, baby, yeah. But anyway, Dusty and I traveled for, exclusively for a couple of years, quite a bit, just him and I. Yeah. At one point, believe it or not, in a car, it was myself, Sting, Lex Luger, and Road Warrior Animal, if you can believe that, all four of us in a car on the road. You want to talk about some fun stories and some fun trips. And so there's a lot of different memories that I have there traveling with different guys. I mean, Rick Steamboat and I traveled for a while together. I mean, so there's just a lot of memories there, but some of the guys I traveled with.
Okay. Well, that's great. I mean, that's, I knew about Dusty and I listened to your podcast with Sting, and that was very interesting when you did that a few weeks back. Great man, been through a lot early in his career, but just sounds like a wonderful person.
Yeah, and Steve is, and I encourage your listeners out there, and I know we'll talk about it in the end, but and you mentioned the podcast, but there's so many, his interviews. We did a 2-part with him.
Yep.
Luger's on there. Did an interview with Lex, a modern day guy, Jackson Riker. WWE guy. I think he's on. I think currently now on Raw. I think on Monday nights, The Bodyguard or something like that. Jackson, he's on the podcast, and many other fascinating stories. I won't get ahead of ourselves here, but anyway, go ahead.
Oh, this is great. I appreciate it. Chemistry with wrestlers. Who do you, in your mind, and if it isn't so, that's fine. Who did you have the most chemistry with that you wrestled against?
Gosh, I mean, it's a great question.
Yeah.
And when I think back on it, I mean, I feel like now some of these guys may have a different opinion, Brian, baby. Right. Based on you interviewing them. In my mind, just for the record, in my mind, the majority of guys I worked with, I felt like I had pretty decent matches with all everybody I worked with. Not 100%,
right,
with a good majority of guys. But to narrow it down, probably the most talked about match or matches is the best of 7 series with Magnum T.A. And Terry and I feel just had such incredible chemistry together. And we weren't the best of friends. We were just business peers early on. The best of friends now. But in those days, but he got it. He understood my style, understood his style, and we both agreed that our match, regardless of anyone else's, was going to be believable to the crowd. So we agreed that we could lay it in on each other, and we weren't going to try to hurt each other.
Right.
That was the goal, but it was going to look believable.
It did.
And I had fans come back and say to me over all the years.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I remember one quote one time. They're like, "Man, I used to watch your matches against Magnum. And I'd walk out of the arena that night and go, I don't know about any of those other matches, but that match with Nikita and Magnum was real, And that was our goal.
Yeah.
So right at the very top, Magnum. I mean, I thought we had good chemistry with the Road Warriors. I felt like I had good chemistry with Rick.
Yeah.
With Steamboat. Now, to some of those guys' credit, right? Flair, Steamboat, some of the others. I mean, they were such consummate professionals that they're the ones who made me look good. It wasn't so much my ability, truthfully, as much as their ability to make me look good.
Yeah. I would say for me, your matches with Magnum were my all-time favorites of yours when you wrestled, and Ric Flair. When you did the Great American Bash, when you had a title defense with him, you made it look very believable. I will say that. I mean, I thought, they just
Hey, Brian, so much so, and fans can go back and watch this on YouTube if they hadn't seen it. So believable that first American Bash in 1985 was the first of 6 times I'd have a fan come over the barricade, come in the ring after me.
Oh my gosh.
And that one's on film. You'll see the guy come in he actually got that. It had never happened before, so I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah.
And he actually got in the ring, got his hands on me, and the cops took a minute. They're like, oh, it must be part of the show. And then they figured out, oh no, this guy's not a part of the show. You'll see them come in like the Keystone Cops, get him out. But that's the first of 6 times when you want to talk about believability of my matches.
Yeah. Wow. That's I don't remember seeing that, but I'm gonna go back and look now sometime soon. Being a member of the Russians, what was that? I mean, did you enjoy that so much? And that was just with Barry Darso and Ivan. Was there just always just that friendship there and being with those guys all the time? Was that just, how was that? I mean, how was that for you?
Yeah. And so if people to reflect back 1984, 1985, 1986, it was still virtually the Cold War era, right?
Yeah.
And so people, again, back to the believability part, I guess to my credit, people coming in the ring after me, we were not well liked, to our credit, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
It was what we intended.
Yeah.
And there were even at times death threats to the office, like if the Koloffs show up in Charleston, we're going to kill them, like for real. And so, but that didn't really bother me because my mind, I was in a certain mindset, right? That, okay, this is who I am, and my persona, and this is how I'm going to project it. So, I projected it as, one of the baddest of the bad, and was friendly to fans. And now I don't ever recall signing an autograph during those early heel days when, as a bag ever, and made fans even more mad, right? And would toy with them with Ivan and stuff, throw a few, like, Uncle Ivan, you could be Shetrakat and Amerikanski, and I laugh. And then they go, Ivan, what did he say? What did he say? Ivan would go, oh, you don't want to know. You don't want to know. So it was like, like I was making fun of Americans or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it was fun. It was, I think back on it, it was a lot of fun.
Did you ever have to, when you were out and not in a town or whatever, if you were in a town, did you ever have to disguise yourself, I guess is the best way to describe it, so people wouldn't come up to you or try to or threaten you or anything like that?
Well, it's kind of, I mean, wrestling was so huge in the Carolinas, in the Mid-Atlantic, uh, that even there were times, like for real, there were times we might be driving through a town, as you're asking, or even down the interstate. Believe it or not, people look over and see three bald guys in a car, which was not very common back then.
Yeah.
Bald, I like your barber, by the way, but bald was not in vogue. I mean, for your old school folks, there was Telly Savalas and Yul Brenner, and then there was the Koloffs,
Right.
and so to see three bald guys in a car driving down through a town or down an interstate, it was not uncommon to be recognized. And I kid you not, I mean, we would see people hang quick U-turns and come up alongside us, and whether they were, yelling, screaming at us or trying to get, whatever, that was not uncommon. So, yeah, in fact, the car I drove, I had this big 76 Fleetwood Cadillac, right? The biggest Cadillac you could buy in the day.
Yeah.
I had the windows so dark it looked like a limousine, just for protection, like for real. So they wouldn't know who was in the car, for protection. Yeah, for real.
Wow. See, learn something new. That's great. Big card events. You talked about the Great American Bash, Starcade. What were those events like for you? Was nerves, preparing for it? It's a lot different today, I know, because a lot of stuff is more written out form and stuff. Where, if I'm correct here, back in the day, whoever the booker was or whoever the main event guy might come up and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. Was there any, I guess, what was it like for you to be in those cards, especially your first year or two when you were so big?
Well, again, really another great question. I'll draw a parallel for your listeners versus the product today of the product back then.
Okay.
I've alluded to it earlier in our conversation, but I'll be more specific now. You are correct. They essentially, remember I was talking about our ability to go in the ring, that essentially we had more creative control. Let me just say that.
Right.
We had more creative, we had almost all creative control. We were given an outcome. Hey, here's the outcome. Like if I'm wrestling Ric Flair there were many times I wrestled Flair for 45, 50, sometimes an hour draw, an hour Broadway. I'm not smart enough to memorize an hour match. Okay. I'm just not that guy, which I'm thankful I didn't have to work in today's era. Okay? Right. By that, I mean, the way I understand today, the whole match is scripted out by a writer. The whole interview basically is scripted out by a writer, and then they go out and perform, right? And they're great performers today. But in those days, for your listeners, if I'm wrestling Flair for an hour and I'm given a 5-minute finish, a 5-minute outcome, that means there's 55 minutes of match that we have to improv.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And a lot of the buildings we were in, we were on separate ends of the building. So there's no communicate. There's no getting together to talk about the match, nor did we do it prior to getting to the town. We'd show up, be given the outcome, and then we would go in the ring and spontaneously tell a story, basically improv a story on the fly in the ring. Remember I said the art of the business?
Yes.
That was the art of the business, having the mind and understanding the psychology of wrestling to be able to go in and dictate a story to you, the fan, that would make sense and lead into the outcome, and for you guys to buy into it. And when people go back, they tell me all the time, they go back and they even look at fan reaction back in those days versus now.
Yeah.
Completely different, right, Brian?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I was a kid watching you or on TV, you know, now when I watch it, when I do watch it, I don't get out of my seat very, very rarely. When I was watching in that era, I was up and I was pounding my fists or yelling at the television or something like that because I couldn't stand you as the
Thank
performer.
you. Thank
And
you.
you'd always get the upper hand at the end, and it would just make me so mad that, yeah, and that is today because you're right. Everything is pretty much written out from what I understand as well. And it's a lost art now. I don't think they
It
have the
is.
ability to think on their feet like you guys did in your era. Even in the
No,
90s,
correct.
up until about probably 10, 15 years ago, I think there was a lot more, like you said, creative control, outcomes of matches. You got the outcome, but they had the ability to make the match. And now it's all from start to finish, pretty much written out for them. And
And
it's a
yeah,
lost art.
and even on one step further, because I just kind of I'm jogging my memory here as we're talking about history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, now obviously you asked me about Starcade, and I didn't really address that, but Starcade, Great American Bash, and some of these bigger matches, especially early on, I would be amiss to not say there wasn't butterflies there for sure. I mean, for sure. I mean, 13 months in the business, I'm going into the ring in front of 25, 30, 35, however many thousand in Memorial Stadium, wrestling the heavyweight the champion of the world, Ric Flair, right? Boy, for the first time ever, by the way.
Yeah.
And so I have no, I'm just, I'm like, whoa, you talk about being jacked up, right?
Yeah.
And then even later, even some of the other big matches, Starcade, a year later or whatever. So yeah, there was definitely nerves there. But I will say this as well. When it wasn't maybe a major match like that, sometimes we get to the building and they would simply say, want Nikita to go over. That was it. And then we even had creative control to figure out how we wanted to do that.
Wow. Yeah.
So, especially if the promoter or the booker, trusted you and knew, you weren't going to try and, screw a guy over or whatever.
Yeah.
So we had that level of creative control, which taking nothing away from the performer's abilities, present day, but you nailed it on the head. It's a lost art, I feel, a very lost art.
Couldn't agree more with you. Like I said, I don't watch it nearly as much as I used to. But when I do, it is a lot different from, even 20 years ago, 15. I think it's, we need to get back to that. I don't know if it ever will. I hope it does. It probably won't.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know that they can. It'd be great if they did.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to Billy Corgan's credit, when I went down, and did a spot for them on NWA Power, reintroducing the World TV title that I held, or whatever. He didn't say a word to me. He didn't. He just said, "You got an interview. Here's what the interview is." He didn't say what to say. He didn't say how long. He didn't tell me how long to talk. I mean, I had again 100% creative control to go out there, say whatever I want to say, talk as I wasn't going to talk for an hour, but you understand what I'm saying. He didn't say, you got 45 seconds, go out and nail it. He just said, here's your interview, go out and do what you do best. And so that's what I did, right?
Yeah.
But anyway. So
I enjoy that show when it was on YouTube when they'd come out. And also I went to NWA 70 in Nashville a few years back.
Yeah.
And I met Dory Funk Jr. I met Magnum T.A.
Okay.
And just a great experience. Took my wife. We went to Nashville for the weekend from Kansas City here and just had a great time at that event there with that card. The card was great. It crowned the national champion again, which was, I don't remember the guy's name now, unfortunately. I'm sorry. But Willie Mack. He got crowned the national champion, and Magnum gave him the title in the ring, and it was
awesome.
It was great. It was a great experience. Actually sat by Billy Corgan for a little bit. He came over where we were sitting and sat there for a little bit. So that was nice.
Yeah. Well, and I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful if we get past all this crazy stuff at some point that Corrigan could get that crank back up again. When I went down there, you know, we were at 14th and Techwood, the studio they were shooting it in. It was only 4 blocks from where we used to do TBS in Techwood.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, I walked in, man, it was like deja vu. You know, it was a larger studio, but nevertheless, I was like enamored. I'm like, oh my gosh, this brings back so many memories. I was taking photos like a fan. You know, I'm like, this is awesome. So that's great. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. You know, they can crank that back up one of these days.
I hope so too. I really do.
Yep.
I think Nick Aldis, he's a great athlete as well.
Yep.
I really enjoy his work, and
absolutely.
Hopefully they can get back to it on TV. So I want to talk about, you worked for the NWA quite a bit, but you also worked in the AWA for a while. What was the difference, and how did you working with those promotions? Same, worse, better, different branches, obviously, but yeah, I'd just like to know how you worked with them, AWA.
Well, the AWA, you know, my agreement with them was, to back up, the AWA, Vern, when he's kind of on his last legs, we were doing some co-promotions with him. We just shows in the Meadowlands. People will see every now and then things flying around where Nick Bockwinkel was wrestling the heavyweight title, and Flair for the AWA, and Rick was wrestling the NWA title, you know, against somebody, you know, in the Meadowlands. They're world tag team champions, our world. So we're doing a lot of co-promotions. Yeah. And so my stint with the AWA was more of, I won't say on loan from the NWA, because again, I had creative control. So I had control of my career. But as a favor to Vern, you know, I went in and did a few shows, especially TV shows, a few matches against their champion at the time. You know, Larry Zbyszko calls himself he's the living legend in his own mind. You know, Larry, if you're listening, hey, anyway, you know, I had a few matches against Larry, mainly to try to help them stay afloat. Not so much because I was looking at winning the title or you know, making a career with the AWA. So that was mainly my appearances with the AWA.
Yeah. One quick question, you know, you never won a world singles heavyweight title. Do you, in the back of your mind, wish you would have? I mean, you're very successful, obviously. I mean, the NWA, I thought you were going to, for sure, with Rick. You know, in the AWA with Larry. Have you ever thought, man, I just wish I could have had it just for, I don't know, a week or something? And then, like, I even won it in 1970 or 71, I think it was. And he won it for a month, but he's a world champion, and he could say that.
Yep. And they actually, the intention was for him to have it longer, but and I don't know who pulled the trigger on that. I think he dropped it to Pedro Morales after he beat legendary Bruno. To answer to your question, no regrets, and probably one of the few, for real, who turned the NWA World Heavyweight title down twice.
Oh, wow.
Not once, but twice. For those who know the story, you know, I had a late wife that battled cancer for 2 years. Actually took a hiatus, took a step away from the main event, you know, in the prime of, as a main event wrestler, walked away, sabbatical, if you will, to address that, to take care of her as a priority, to take care of her up until the time of her death at age 26. And then probably a week later, Rick invited me down to his house. He had the book at the time, he had the belt at the time, and offered me the world heavyweight title, and I respectfully declined. Called me maybe a few weeks later, I forget the exact time frame. Offered to me a second time. I was humbly, you know, I would thank you, Rick, thank you, but no thank you. Don't tell that story too often, but they are facts. And probably some would look at that and go, "You are crazy to not, you know, even for a week," or like you're saying. But I just had no. So therefore, have no regret for not having it.
Yeah.
And perhaps I'm one of the few guys, if maybe not the only guy, that could say I turned it down twice.
Yeah. Well, I know back then his schedule, from what I've read, was just brutal. I mean,
It was
he was on the road
all over
every
the world.
night. Yeah, every night, twice on Sunday. Sometimes I've read, and
Yep.
that schedule would be brutal on any person.
Yep.
And so,
yeah, and Brian, there's back in those days, it wasn't like now they changed the title in 60 seconds on a show. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, there was a lot, I feel, much more respect for that title back then, much more respect for whoever was the champion. And honestly, a lot of weight on the shoulders of the one who had it, expected of you. Look, you were expected to draw a crowd. You were expected to fill an arena if you had the world belt. And if you didn't, I mean, the promotion would poo-poo on that pretty quick, Yeah. You probably weren't going to have it very long.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the main reason I said no at all. But I did know the pressure that came with having that belt back then.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's an interesting fact I did not know about. So I've definitely learned a lot today. So I want to ask you one more thing. What are you doing now? We were talking a little bit earlier about your podcast, but I know you're doing a lot of other things. So if you want to go into that some in your book you talked about, that'd be great.
I appreciate it. Well, we transitioned this way. So, I mean, the wrestling career I look back on, very fondly for all the things, I was able to do and accomplish, and certainly all the guys I had the privilege of being in the ring with, and many of the matches, some of the legendary some of the very creative ideas of Dusty, war games and many others, right? From Russian chain matches to cage matches to barbed wire matches to bull rope matches. I mean, I had some crazy ones, right?
Yes.
So a lot of very fond memories, and how I transitioned from the career to what I'm doing now is to say, as unusual a story as it is that how I got into wrestling, I made a decision at age 33, which again, people think, well, that's crazy. You turn the belt down, you're crazy. You walked away at 33. In fact, Luger is on record of saying when he heard I chose to walk away, he goes, that guy's lost his mind. Was he an idiot? I mean, like, he's for real, like I said that. Because people have to understand, we went from being paid by how many people we put in the seats, essentially, especially in those early days, and only making, you might say, thousands to the explosion of pay-per-view, and guys making millions and millions of dollars, right?
Right.
And I walked away from that, Brian.
Yeah.
I walked away from multiple millions of dollars of contracts by choice, under my terms, and at the age 33, and it wasn't because of injury, it was because of my own goals. I wanted to leave on top of the business, essentially as a champion, or have been remembered as a champion. Okay.
Yeah.
So for your listeners to understand that, little did I know, like many things in my life, just like I wasn't looking at becoming a pro wrestler, I wasn't looking for this to happen either. But 11 months after departure from the ring, I found myself at an altar in a church, surrendering my life to Jesus Christ. And just like I didn't grow up in Russia, I didn't grow up in church, but I knew the story. Like many, I heard the story of the man Jesus who, lived and was crucified, and spikes driven through his hands and feet, and a spear through his side, and rose again 3 days later. I knew the story in my head. That story, however, had never made the 18-inch trip from my head down to my heart. But on the 17th of October, 1993, it did make that trip. I went to the altar, got on my knees, confessed and accepted Jesus into my life. I encountered the man Jesus that day. And Brian, life has never been the same since. It just hasn't been. That encounter changed me forever. And it changed the whole course of what I would do for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Fast forward all these years later, kind of give you a little more condensed version of this story. I now, since that decision, have traveled to a total of 30 countries.
Wow.
I've been to all 50 states. I have preached and ministered in 28 different denominations.
Oh, wow.
I have been a part of different men's ministries now since 2006. In fact, Lex Luger and I co-facilitate a camp for men.
Mm-hmm.
Like, send an invitation to you sometime to come, called Man Camp.
Okay.
And we do them in northern Georgia. We bring small groups of men in. Your listeners can go to mancamp.info, INFO.
Okay.
And check us out, mancamp.info. And we do one in the spring, one in the fall. We'll do our next one in April here of 2021. And already have guys from 5 or 6 different states already registered.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
And so I'm very passionate about ministering to men. So is Lex. I do a one-day conference called Man Up.
Okay.
Man Up Conference.
Man Up.
And as you know, the podcast is called It's Time to Man Up. And so, if I encourage your listeners, go on all the platforms, iTunes, iHeart, all look for the Man Up podcast. Yep. Go on the website, check out the Man Camp. Mm-hmm. If you have pastors or people in ministry listening to your show that would want to bring the Man Up conference in on a weekend, go to Koloff.net. Koloff.net. In fact, you're the first to know this. That's a brand new website we just launched as of today.
Well, there you go.
Okay. And then real quick, I'm on all the social media platforms, Nikita Koloff with the numeral 1 behind it. That's the real me. Facebook. Look for me in a river. In that river, you'll see Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, myself, and another wrestler. That's actually the Jordan River in Israel.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And we were taking turns baptizing each other in the Jordan River in Israel.
Amazing.
And last but not least, books.
Yeah, let's talk about books.
Yeah, I've written 3. I'm working on a 4th one.
Okay.
But the last one, especially if people want to know the full story of Nikita Koloff, go get Nikita: A Tale of the Ring and Redemption. Okay. That one is what I call inspirational.
All right.
Motivational one that folks would want to get is Nikita, Wrestling with Success, Developing a Championship Mentality. Both of those are available on on Koloff.net, right in my store. All
right. Well, you know what we're going to do? I'm going to make sure that those get on under the description of the podcast. I'll put I've got your social media platforms, and I also have I had NikitaKoloff.com, but I will add the Koloff.net, and I'll make sure that gets on there for you, because, I was saved 18 years ago. Yeah, 18 years ago, Easter Sunday, at a missionary Baptist church. My wife and I were at my second marriage, and my wife and I were just dating at the time. And she took me to this church, and, that's Easter Sunday. I had the feeling, and I was saved. Mm-hmm. And like you said, it hasn't been the same since. It's been a wonderful life. I'm very blessed and very fortunate. My wife is a beautiful person. We have 4 children, and we're very blessed. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, that's amazing. I appreciate you sharing a little of your story, because, and for your listeners out there, I know we just got a few minutes left, but I want to, I want to say this too, on note of that. And let me mention, you mentioned NikitaKoloff.com. It's that's my old site. So Koloff.net is now the new one, right?
Right.
But for all your listeners. But what's interesting too is, even hearing just a little bit of your story, one of the things I encourage, men with their 18 years or older and considering the Man Camp is our goal, Brian. Our goal is, no matter how healthy a man feels he is now, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, even and or spiritually, right? That our goal Jackson and I, when God gave us this vision for this camp, was for the men who commit themselves and come, is to send them back home even better equipped and healthier than they currently are in all those aspects of life, and to equip them to even better than they are in terms of a godly husband, a godly father like yourself, just a man of God in general. And I like to say, we want to see men whole men living holy lives, wholly available unto the Lord, and just fulfilling their destiny. And so to hear, your encounter and to know that, your life was changed, just thrills me. That's awesome.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And again, I know we're going to wrap it up here. I really appreciate your time tonight, coming on here and telling your story and your experiences. And I just want to say thank you so much. And we appreciate it. And the listeners out there, go to koloff.net, go on to social media platforms, and you'll learn a lot. And thank you again, Mr. Koloff. I really do appreciate it, sir.
I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to meet face to face here sometime, perhaps down the road, and or to some of your listeners. And let me just say this to all your listeners: hey, listen up! You better tune in every time to Bumps and Thumps, or the Russian Nightmare Nikita Koloff will be looking for you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Koloff. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And to our podcast listeners, please, again, go to the koloff.net, look at those platforms, enjoy those books. And thank you again, Mr. Koloff.
Thank you, Brian. God bless you. God bless all your listeners out there. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you for yours, sir. I appreciate it. All right. And that's it for this episode. Thank you.